Today, everything fell into place in a way I never imagined. New Year's Eve had always been a time of celebration and hope, yet as I walked into my parents' home, an unsettling premonition gripped me. I had chosen the warmth and comfort of family over the lure of a bustling friend's party, a decision I believed was right. But Sarah, my wife, had other plans. Her insistence that I join the festivities elsewhere was more than a mere suggestion. It was a signal of the rift forming between us. As the clock inched closer to midnight, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was destined to change everything, marking the beginning of a betrayal I would come to know all too well. Midnight was approaching, and the city hummed with the electric anticipation of a new year. I should have been with Sarah, my wife, but instead, I sat in my parents' living room, sipping whiskey and forcing laughter at my father's corny jokes. Something was off, though. I could feel it in my bones. Sarah had been distant for weeks, insisting I go to my parents' house instead of the party we'd been invited to. "You know how much they miss you," she had said, her smile too tight, her voice just a little too sweet. "I'll just go with the girls. You can meet me later." I had wanted to believe her. But as the clock struck midnight and my phone buzzed in my pocket, I knew deep down that this year wasn't starting with celebration. It was starting with betrayal. I pulled my phone from my pocket, expecting a message from Sarah. A simple Happy New Year, I miss you, something to bridge the miles between us. Instead, there was nothing. No text. No call. My stomach tightened. Outside, the neighborhood erupted in cheers. Fireworks burst in brilliant reds and golds over the rooftops, but I barely saw them. I scrolled through our last conversation 7 hours ago. My message from earlier, "Having fun?" remained unread. Something was wrong. I stepped away from my family, the warmth of the room suddenly suffocating. The moment I dialed her number, a gnawing sense of dread took hold of me. 1 ring. 2. It went a voicemail. I called again. This time she answered. "Hey," she said, breathless. Music thumped in the background, laughter echoing through the line. I didn't hear my phone. "Happy New Year, babe." Her voice was just a little too bright. "Where are you?" I asked, pushing down the unease. She hesitated. "Still at the party," she finally said. "It's crazy here. You should come." I closed my eyes. She wasn't lying, not exactly. But she wasn't telling me the truth either. "I'm leaving now," I said, already grabbing my coat. Her sharp inhale told me everything. "Daniel, there's no need." I hung up before she could stop me. Because I knew. I knew I was about to walk into something that would change everything. The streets were slick with melted snow, the cold biting through my jacket as I drove. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, my heart beat a dull, relentless drum in my ears. Sarah had hesitated when I told her I was coming. That hesitation was louder than any excuse she could have given me. The party was at Eric's place, a penthouse apartment that overlooked the city. A place filled with expensive whiskey, designer dresses, and people who chased indulgence like it was their life's purpose. Sarah loved it there. I had tolerated it for her. Tonight, I wasn't coming as a guest. I parked down the street, my breath coming out in uneven puffs as I stepped out into the cold. From the sidewalk, I could already hear the party in full swing, the deep bass of music vibrating through the glass doors, laughter spilling into the winter air. I walked through the entrance, nodding at a few familiar faces who barely registered my presence. I scanned the room, searching for her. Then I saw her, and my world shattered. She stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights. Her red dress clung to her, her hair cascading over one shoulder, and her lips, those lips that had kissed me goodbye just hours ago, were pressed against another man's. His hands were on her waist, pulling her closer. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't hesitating. She was lost in it. A deep, hollow ache cracked through my chest. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, as if sensing me, she opened her eyes. Her gaze met mine. The color drained from her face. I took a single step forward. Her lover turned, following her gaze, and I recognized him instantly. Eric. My friend. The host of the party. He smirked, an arrogant, lazy smirk like he'd won some prize, like he had taken something from me and didn't regret it for a second. Sarah's lips parted, a whisper of my name barely escaping. But I didn't need to hear it. I already knew the truth. She hadn't lost herself in a drunken mistake. This wasn't an accident. It had never been an accident. She had chosen this. And now, she was about to see what happened when choices had consequences. The party around us didn't stop. Laughter, clinking glasses, the distant hum of music, none of it faltered as my marriage unraveled before my eyes. Sarah took a hesitant step toward me, her red dress shifting like a warning. Daniel, I held up a hand. My pulse was a war drum in my ears, but I wouldn't let her see me break. Eric, the bastard, just raised his drink in my direction, grinning like this was some kind of game. Didn't expect to see you here, man. His audacity was staggering. I exhaled slowly, forcing my expression into something unreadable. My hands wanted to curl into fists, but I wouldn't give him, or her, the satisfaction of seeing my rage. Instead, I walked to the bar. The bartender barely glanced at me as I poured myself a whiskey. Neat. I took a sip, savoring the burn, and then, because the weight of betrayal deserved an audience, I turned back to the crowd. I raised my glass. To old friends, I said loudly, my voice carrying over the party. Heads turned, eyes curious. Sarah stiffened. Eric leaned back, amused. I lifted my drink toward him. And new beginnings. Someone cheered, oblivious. Others clapped, raising their own glasses. Sarah's lips parted in silent horror. She understood. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't surrender. This was the beginning of my revenge. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, silently pleading for this to go unnoticed. But I wasn't going to let her hide. Not tonight. Eric, ever the arrogant bastard, chuckled and took a slow sip of his drink. Didn't realize we were making speeches. I met his gaze and smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made his confidence falter just a little. You know me, Eric, I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. Always one for tradition. New Year's is about reflection, after all. Looking back on the choices we made. Sarah inhaled sharply. She was catching on now, but she didn't dare speak. I turned toward the crowd, forcing my voice into something lighthearted. Speaking of choices, I was just telling someone the other day. I paused, letting my eyes flicker toward Sarah before dragging them back to Eric. It's always fascinating, isn't it? How people reveal who they really are when they think no one's watching. A ripple of murmured agreement passed through the partygoers. Eric smirked, but I saw it, the tiny flicker of unease beneath the surface. Good. I took another sip, then turned back to Sarah. She hadn't moved. Her fingers were clenched at her sides, her breath unsteady. Sarah, I said softly, what was it you were about to say earlier? The air between us tightened. She swallowed hard. Daniel, please. I tilted my head. No, don't stop now. I mean, I came all this way. You should finish your thought. She glanced around, eyes darting to the faces watching us. Some were beginning to notice the tension, whispering among themselves. Eric shifted uncomfortably. I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough for only the three of us to hear. I wonder, I murmured, was this the first time, or just the first time I caught you? Sarah flinched. Eric's smirk disappeared. That was answer enough. I exhaled sharply, nodding to myself. Right. My voice was cool now, distant. I should have known. I turned to leave, but before I could, Eric's voice cut through the noise. Come on, man. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. A slow, sharp laugh escaped me before I could stop it. I turned back to him, stepping in close until we were eye to eye. You think this is dramatic? I said quietly. No, Eric. Dramatic is what happens next. Sarah sucked in a breath. Because she knew me. She knew I wasn't walking away without a fight. And she had no idea what was coming. The weight of betrayal sat thick in the air, an invisible force pressing down on us. Sarah's breath was shallow, her hands trembling at her sides, but she said nothing. She knew there were no words that could save her now. Eric, on the other hand, still thought this was salvageable. He scoffed, leaning in just enough for only the three of us to hear. Look, Daniel, it's not a big deal. It was just a kiss. I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. Just a kiss, I echoed, shaking my head. The rage inside me was ice, not fire. Cold, precise, controlled. My fingers itched for a fight, but I wouldn't give him that. No. A broken nose would heal. Humiliation? That was permanent. I exhaled, steadying my voice. You know, Eric, it's funny. I turned slightly, speaking just loud enough for the nearby guests to overhear. I remember you once told me that a man should never trust someone who smiles too much while holding a knife. Eric's smirk wavered. Sarah inhaled sharply, realization dawning. I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out my phone. I took my time unlocking it, scrolling until I found what I needed. Then, with a single tap, the speakers roared to life. Sarah's voice. Come on, Eric. Just one more time before midnight. He'll never know. Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned, eyes widening as the recording played on. Eric went rigid. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. You don't get it, she had whispered in that recording, her voice desperate. Daniel trusts me completely. A stunned silence fell over the party. Eric recovered first, stepping toward me. You set me up? I smirked, slipping my phone back into my pocket. No, Eric. You set yourself up. Sarah finally found her voice. Daniel, save it. My tone was even. Calm. Deadly. You made your choices. Now, you get to live with them. I turned to the crowd, raising my glass one last time. To trust, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. And to the people who never deserved it. Then, without another word, I set my drink down and walked away. And as I stepped out into the cold night air, the weight that had been crushing me for so long finally lifted. Because I wasn't the one left in ruins. They were. The winter air hit me like a slap, crisp and unforgiving. Behind me, the party was in chaos, muffled gasps, hurried whispers, and Sarah's voice calling my name. I didn't turn back. I walked down the street, past the glimmering lights of the city, past laughing strangers who had no idea that my entire world had just imploded. But strangely, I felt lighter. I had spent years building my life around Sarah, believing in the illusion of what we were. Tonight, that illusion had shattered. And maybe that was a good thing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was before I even looked. Sarah. I let it ring. Then a text came through. Daniel, please. We need to talk. I stopped walking, staring at the screen. For years, I would have answered without hesitation. I would have listened, forgiven, tried to salvage the wreckage. But tonight, I had nothing left to give. I deleted the message and kept walking. Sarah had made her choices. Now, I was making mine. And for the first time in years, I was choosing myself. The city felt different as I walked, like I was seeing it for the first time, stripped of the familiar comfort I once had. The streets were still alive with celebration, couples laughing, strangers embracing as fireworks burst overhead. But inside, I was quiet. Empty. I found myself in front of a bar I hadn't been to in years. A place I used to go before Sarah and I were Sarah and I. Before our lives had become intertwined with trust one thought was unshakable. I pushed open the door. The warmth of the place wrapped around me, the scent of whiskey and aged with a sharp contrast to the winter outside. I took a seat at the far end of the bar, ordered a drink, and let the silence settle. I barely noticed when someone slid into the seat beside me. Didn't expect to see you here. The voice was familiar, too familiar. I turned and found myself looking into a pair of dark eyes I hadn't seen in years. Lena. The woman I once thought might have been the one before Sarah. Before everything. She smiled, tilting her head. You look like a man carrying the weight of the world. I huffed out a humorless laugh. Something like that. She eyed me for a moment, then nodded at my drink. So, are we drinking to forget, or drinking to remember? I turned the glass in my hand, watching the amber liquid swirl. Drinking to move on, I said finally. She smiled again, raising her own glass. To moving on then. Our drinks clinked, and for the first time that night, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe this wasn't an ending. Maybe this was the start of something new. Lena took a slow sip of her drink, watching me over the rim of her glass. The years had been kind to her. She still had that same quiet confidence, the kind that made people lean in when she spoke. So, she said, setting her glass down with a soft clink, who broke your heart? I exhaled, shaking my head. You always were direct. She smirked. No point in pretending. You look like a man who just walked away from something big. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how to summarize the last few hours, hell, the last few years, in a way that made sense. But Lena had always been good at reading between the lines. It was Sarah, wasn't it? She guessed, her tone softer now. I glanced at her, surprised. You knew. She shrugged, stirring the ice in her glass. I saw the wedding photos a few years back. I remember thinking, I hope she's good to him. A bitter laugh escaped me. She was. Until she wasn't. Lena didn't ask for details. She just nodded, as if she understood that some betrayals didn't need to be spoken aloud to be felt. For a long moment, we sat in comfortable silence. Then, she leaned in slightly. So, what now? I frowned. What do you mean? I mean, you're free. She gestured vaguely to the air around us. No more Sarah. No more lies. No more pretending. What are you going to do with it? I hadn't thought that far ahead. My entire night had been about uncovering the truth, exposing it, and walking away before it destroyed me. But now I had choices. For the first time in years, I wasn't tethered to Sarah's expectations. I wasn't tied to the life I thought I was supposed to have. I looked at Lena, the question still hanging between us. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself a real smile. I guess, I said slowly, I'll figure it out. She raised her glass again. To figuring it out, then. I clinked mine against hers, letting the moment settle. Whatever came next, it was mine to decide. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like freedom. The world outside the bar had changed while I sat inside, nursing whiskey and old memories. The new year had officially arrived, but for the first time in my life, I had no idea what came next. Lena and I talked for hours. Not about love, not about second chances, just about life. About the roads we'd taken, the people we used to be, and the ones we became. By the time we stepped outside, the city was quiet. The fireworks were gone, the streets littered with confetti and forgotten resolutions. You need a ride? Lena asked, tucking her hands into the pockets of her coat. I shook my head. I think I'll walk. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Take care of yourself, Daniel. You too, Lena. She hesitated, as if debating whether to say something else. But in the end, she just smiled, turned, and walked away. I stood there for a while, breathing in the cold morning air, watching the sky shift from deep blue to pale gray. And then my phone rang. Sarah. I stared at the screen, letting it ring until it stopped. Then another text came through. Daniel, please. Just talk to me. I exhaled, shaking my head. She still thought this could be fixed. That I would come back. That I would let her explain. Let her rewrite the story in a way that made her the victim of a momentary lapse in judgment. But I wasn't that man anymore. I deleted the text, then scrolled down to her name in my contacts. My thumb hovered over it for a second. Then, without hesitation, I blocked her. A weight lifted from my chest. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and started walking. For the first time in years, the road ahead of me felt completely unknown. And for the first time in years, I was okay with that. The city was waking up around me as I walked. Shop owners rolling up their metal shutters, street sweepers clearing away the remnants of last night's celebrations. The world was moving forward, and so was I. I didn't know where I was going, but for once, I wasn't looking back. Sarah was gone. The life I had spent years building with her was over. But strangely, I didn't feel broken. I felt lighter. A small cafe on the corner caught my eye. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside, the scent of fresh coffee drifting through the air. I pushed open the door, stepping into the quiet hum of early morning conversations. The barista smiled at me. Rough night. I exhaled a small laugh. Something like that. She nodded knowingly. First coffee of the new year is supposed to be a good omen. What'll it be? I thought for a moment. A year ago, I would have ordered black coffee, simple, predictable, a reflection of the life I had settled into. But today was different. Something new, I said finally. Surprise me. She grinned. I like that. As I waited, I glanced around the cafe. People were lost in their own worlds, some working on laptops, others chatting in hushed tones. Life was moving, shifting, reinventing itself, just as I was. The barista set a steaming cup in front of me. Try this. I took a sip. It was rich, unfamiliar, laced with flavors I couldn't quite name. But it was good. Not bad, I said. She winked. A good omen, then. I nodded, taking another sip. Maybe she was right. Maybe, despite everything, this was just the beginning. And maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.